Thanks very much. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss this, even though it's 4:00 in the morning in Singapore. I'll try and talk quickly. So the NADIA trial was designed to be relevant to the way that most people receive their antiretroviral therapy globally, using the WHO's recommended public health approach, where essentially you give standardized, simple regimens and do sparse viral load monitoring, and you don't use resistance testing to select drugs, at least select nucleosides. And the trial aimed to answer two key questions for the public health approach. Firstly, whether dolutegravir is truly non-inferior to a PI, in this case darunavir, for second-line therapy, and whether you really need to switch from the combination of tenofovir 3TC to zidovudine 3TC when you start second-line therapy, or whether you can simply continue through with the tenofovir 3TC. So we enrolled about 500 patients, 164 in Uganda, Kenya, and Zimbabwe, who were failing on a first-line NRTI regimen. They had loads of resistance, NRTI resistance, as you'd expect, and we randomized them to dolutegravir or darunavir, and we randomized them to tenofovir 3TC or zidovudine 3TC, and we just did a viral load at week 24 and week 48. And the key findings for the dolutegravir darunavir comparison were that both produced very high rates of suppression, over 90% below 400 copies, with essentially no difference between the groups. And so we can say that dolutegravir is non-inferior, but it wasn't superior to darunavir in this broadly representative population. And the rate of rebound was about 6%, again, similar between the two groups. But we found 4 people in the dolutegravir arm had major resistance mutations, whereas in the darunavir arm, where none had major resistance to darunavir. And what's key, really, is that the dolutegravir did just as well in the people who had no predicted active nucleosides. So the nucleosides were predicted to be completely inactive. We found that it did just as well. So this Achilles heel of the regimen actually is not that at all. For the tenofovir zidovudine comparison, again, we got good responses. Essentially, we found that tenofovir 3TC, sticking with that when you switch to second line, is non-inferior to zidovudine 3TC, even in those with high-level tenofovir resistance at the start of the study. So why are these findings important? Well, firstly, although the WHO changed their guidelines in 2019 from long-standing PI 2 nucleosides in second line to dolutegravir and 2 nucleosides, this was based on one randomized controlled trial that left some really big gaps in the evidence around dolutegravir use with compromised nucleosides. And the last WHO guidelines were full of these caveats about there being no data using dolutegravir with compromised nucleosides, no predicted active nucleosides, which is actually the exact situation you'd expect to find in populations in the public health approach. So our results provide substantial reassurance that dolutegravir and 2 nucleosides is a very solid regimen, even when you've got extreme nucleoside resistance. And the findings have much broader implications than second line, because you've got large-scale switching going on from efavirenz to dolutegravir-based regimens, often without viral load testing. And there's been a concern that maybe there'll be people lurking in there with a viral load replication, harboring resistance mutations, and how will they do in these programmatic switches? So the results are very reassuring from that perspective. And then also the tenofovir 3TC comparison, that's really important too, because although WHO has said, for a decade plus to do this switch, actually there's never been a randomized controlled trial to look at it. And this shows actually you can stick with tenofovir 3TC, once daily regimen, well tolerated, and much easier for standardizing treatments through programs.
Well, thank you so much for being up at 4 a.m, and for that I really apologize. You were quite lively when you gave your presentation and Q&A, so excellent that you were able to do it. So were you surprised by your results?
For the darunavir dolutegravir, no, I wasn't surprised. I was reassured by them. But it was this lurking fear that maybe the guidelines went out on a limb. It's putting a very successful, one of the most successful programmatic interventions of medicine was putting it at risk by doing something where the data was lacking for a high-risk group. So I was reassured by that comparison, not surprised. The tenofovir one, we found in the EARNEST trial, which was done in a very similar setting with lopinavir as a PI and a PI monotherapy, and raltegravir, we found really it didn't make much difference what nucleosides people took. They still got really excellent long-term responses with a PI and 2 nucleosides in that trial. So that was really the impetus to carry this one out and really challenge this this WHO recommendation. So actually, I was surprised that the hypothesis was true, but it was based on strong observed data.